The reason they felt they needed to do that, Jesse, is because if they told their audience the truth, that when gas is the most expensive it's been, flights are super expensive, that 5,000 kids decided to spend a weekend in summer traveling across the country to go hear from conservative speakers, maybe the audience of The View would think twice about all of their ideas. That's why they felt so compelled to try to smear our wonderful summit this last weekend.
Yeah, they have nothing else to talk about. Maybe you should get the lawyer that worked on that Covington Catholic school case. What was that, a $200 million settlement? I think, Charlie, you could use the money, and your students definitely could, too.
Her disgusting, gross elitism and her complete out-of-touch nature with respect to the rest of the world. Sunny Hostin goes on The View and decides now would be a great time to dump all over the so-called uneducated.
What we did not have is white women who voted about 52%, right, for Donald Trump. Uneducated white women, is my understanding. You have Latino men, actually, voting more for him. And you have, and black men was not the story. We're not the story here because they voted almost 80% for the vice president.
It started with a moment most people missed, but behind that moment was a firestorm waiting to explode. 5,000 students, flights packed, hotel rooms filled, a crowd of high schoolers and college kids from all over the country, landing in one place for one purpose: to listen to conservative speakers. It was a peaceful summit. No protesters, no violence. Just young people trying to understand the world in their own way. But then, it hit national TV.
Just because you didn't go to college doesn't mean you're stupid, and it doesn't mean that you don't have wisdom. You can go to college and get a bunch of irrelevant facts about how men can allegedly give birth or whatever they teach. But I said this to our team. I said working people, the muscular class, including working women, they are so in favor of Trump, and they don't want to be called stupid or uneducated.
Charlie Kirk's the founder and CEO of Turning Point USA and the author of the new book, The College Scam. So, Charlie, do you accept The View's apology?
I mean, regardless of whether or not I accept it, the question is, do our students accept it? That's really what's at heart here. They went after our 5,000 students at our event there of high school and college kids. And look, I get attacked all the time. People say false things. I'm a public figure. But when you go after 16 and 17-year-olds that travel from across the country that then have to live for the rest of their life with a shadow over them because someone at ABC says that they might be linked to neo-Nazis.
And things got ugly fast. On The View, one comment changed everything. Instead of asking why so many young people were showing up to a conservative event, Sunny Hostin went for the jugular. She didn't talk about the students' enthusiasm or their dedication. She questioned their intelligence. She leaned into the same tired stereotype: if you're conservative and didn't go to college, you must be uneducated and therefore not worth listening to.
But look, what did it take for us to get to the point of an apology? We had to threaten a lawsuit, Jesse. And by the way, we're still entertaining it. We're talking to some of the best lawyers out there that are experts in this. And as you know, these things can be very complicated. There's a lot of facts and circumstances around it. But we're not going to let this go, because you should not be able to smear 5,000 high school and college kids and then just be able to walk away with it.
It's amazing. She's specifically there referring to the women, but of course it's the non-college educated men as well who voted for Donald Trump. And the nerve of this woman, to whom the country has given so much, to try to dump on people who didn't go to college. Look at you, look at your achievements. How do you like the so-called uneducated now?
It was more than just a jab. It was a slap in the face to thousands of families across America. And that's when everything flipped. The media narrative was no longer about students showing political interest. It became a story of elitism versus everyday people, of television personalities questioning the value of hard-working Americans who didn't take the college route. By the way, before we continue, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us grow and share more intriguing stories. Now let's continue.
Sunny Hostin I think she went to Binghamton undergrad, and she went to Notre Dame Law School, which is a great law school. Her son right now is at Harvard. That son she wants us to think is sitting there oppressed, who she's got to fight on behalf of because America is so awful to him. They're educating him right now at Harvard University. And Jason, would you take a look at this? Because I'm going to guess, I haven't been to your house down in Tennessee, but I'm going to guess it doesn't look like this. This is Sunny Hostin's home in this shitty country that she can't stand, that doesn't treat black people like Sunny well. She let People magazine feature her home. Look at this dump. This country sucks. She went to Notre Dame Law School. She makes millions on The View. Her son's at Harvard. I'm sure her daughter's at private school on her way to some Ivy League. This is where Sunny lives. And F off, America. I can't stand how you've kept us all in chains. That's her messaging.
That comment didn't stay on TV. It hit the internet like wildfire. But here's where it got even more intense. Charlie Kirk, the organizer behind that student event, wasn't just offended, he was furious. Not because he got called out, he's used to criticism, but because student 16 and 17-year-olds were suddenly being linked to extremist ideologies on national television.
You think if a liberal came to speak at University of Kentucky, they'd give an open mic like I just did to a conservative and had a discussion like this?
I certainly hope they would.
No, they wouldn't. Because speech is not a left-wing value. That is why they have to deploy shock troops called Antifa to go after everywhere I go. When I go to University of California, Davis next week, there has to be 120 police officers because of the threats, the violent threats of liberals that want me dead, that want to disrupt our events. There are no right-wing hecklers that come to events like this. I think it's rather clear there's one side that is trying to do everything they can to shut one side up, and one side that's trying to open up the marketplace of ideas. And I think that's rather self-evident.
Sunny Hostin over at The View had some choice words for Brittany Mahomes, who's married to the other Mahomes guy who plays for the Chiefs. She had the temerity to like a Trump post online, and she's been taking shit for it ever since. She wound up posting this defensive tweet saying, God, people are like, you got to settle down. Like, go be a better person and don't jump all over people for just random stuff. And here's Sunny Hostin weighing in on it.
Since she is in an interracial marriage, she should have known that to support a racist is problematic. Her children are biracial, and her family is one of the families that in the 70s could not have lived in any of Donald Trump's buildings. So
Sunny Hostin of The View finds out that this is fantastic. She is descended from slaveholders. Here's what she said when she went out on The View.
Really reluctant to do it because I just sensed that there could be something in my family history that would be disappointing. But what I found out was that my mother's family, while they are Puerto Rican, they actually originate from Spain. And the reason that they moved to Puerto Rico is because the slave trade had been sort of canceled in Spain and then Curacao, and then they moved all of their slaves to Puerto Rico. And so the family business, I have been told that they were printers and journalists.
Imagine spending your summer traveling across the country, excited to learn, only to come home with a label you never asked for. That's what these kids were dealing with. Charlie didn't let it slide. He brought up a past legal case. Remember the Covington Catholic incident? A media smear that ended in a massive settlement. $200 million. That wasn't just a hint. It was a warning shot. He and his team weren't afraid to take legal action, especially if it meant defending the students who trusted them. And he wasn't alone. That's when another familiar face joined in someone who knows exactly how media narratives work. Someone who's spent years dissecting how quickly reputations can be built or destroyed, depending on who's holding the microphone.
First of all, I'm thrilled you're doing the next debate, Megyn. That's a step in the right direction because honestly, you're going to ask the tough questions very firmly and fairly. More, that Univision person that was there a couple debates ago was just obviously had an agenda, and you're going to hold them accountable. And also, you have a really big audience of people of all different political backgrounds. And finally, Megyn, I think, and I don't know what you're going to ask, but I would imagine you're going to get some answers on this trans thing, which I think is a civilizational defining issue, right? That has not received any attention.
By NBC,
right?
Not a question.
Because they know it's a loser.
The revisionist media coverage of it, Charlie, just yet another reminder of how important the lane you and I are in has become for anybody wanting actual honest information.
Yeah, a couple thoughts. First, that's the #1 podcast out there. And so it's not just some fringe thing. It does very, very well. It always almost near the top of the podcast charts. Number two, I just laugh when, grown men talk like 15-year-old girls with their up inflection of their voice. We don't really know if they're guilty or in it. It's like, it just drives me crazy. It's like that's central casting for Upper East Side metrosexual New York Times podcast host.
But before we get there, let's stop and think, how did we go from a student gathering to national outrage? It wasn't just the comment. It was what that comment represented. A divide that's been quietly growing wider, now dragged into the spotlight for everyone to see. Now, enter the real clash. On one side, you had a TV personality who's built her image around being the moral authority, the voice of what's right, always ready to call out injustice. On the other side, you had two media figures known for one thing, tearing through emotional noise with cold, sharp facts. That's exactly what happened. No screaming, no name-calling, just a straight-up takedown. Charlie Kirk came in with data voting records, statistics, pattern sand. He didn't flinch. He pointed directly at the contradictions. Why was it okay to label voters as uneducated if they didn't agree with a certain side? Since when did college become the only measure of wisdom? And then came the real game-changer Megyn Kelly. She didn't rush in with emotion. She was precise, calm, and honestly, brutal. She took Sunny's arguments apart piece by piece, not with opinion, but with logic. While Sunny leaned into moral outrage, Megyn focused on the foundation of that outrage and showed just how shaky it really was. And what made it hit even harder? They weren't yelling. They weren't trying to go viral. They just laid everything out in a way that couldn't be ignored. The effect? You could feel the shift. Sunny's confident tone, that signature self-assurance, it started to crack. Because when facts don't line up with the story you're telling, it all starts to unravel. The unraveling wasn't just emotional, it was personal. Sunny had taken a direct shot at people who didn't go to college, calling them uneducated, even implying they lacked value in the political conversation. But Charlie wasn't about to let that slide without pulling the curtain all the way back. He made it crystal clear, not having a degree doesn't mean you're dumb. It doesn't mean you don't think critically, or that your voice matters any less. In fact, he called out something bigger, the quiet class war hidden in plain sight. He described what he called the muscular class, working people, men and women who build, fix, serve, create the backbone of the country. These are the people, he said, who are tired of being mocked just because they don't have a diploma hanging on their wall. And more importantly, these are the people increasingly backing Trump, not because of ignorance, but because they're fed up with being talked down to. Charlie also pointed to his own movement, Turning Point USA, and how it brought thousands of these so-called uneducated young people together, not to riot or protest, but to learn and talk and question. He even mentioned his book, The College Scam, pushing the idea that college isn't the golden ticket everyone claims it to be. And when asked if he accepted the View's apology, he turned it around, do the students accept it? Because they were the ones being dragged, not him. This wasn't just a feud anymore. It was starting to feel like a public reckoning. And just when it seemed like things couldn't get more heated, the spotlight turned directly onto Sunny herself. Charlie and Megyn didn't just challenge her opinions, they exposed the contradiction between her words and her reality. Sunny had built her brand on fighting for the oppressed, on calling out injustice, on standing up for the little guy. But then the facts came out. Her resume? Impressive. Undergrad at Binghamton. Law degree from Notre Dame. Her son? Currently at Harvard. Her home? A multi-million-dollar estate proudly showcased in People magazine. That's when the cracks in her narrative really began to show. How could someone who lives in that kind of comfort and privilege sit on national TV and lecture working-class Americans about how they're the problem? How could she claim to be a victim of a broken system while sending her kids to Ivy League schools and living in a house most people will never even step foot inside? It wasn't just about hypocrisy, it was about credibility. Megyn Kelly didn't need to scream. She didn't even need to insult. She just laid out the facts, and the facts told a different story than the one Sunny had been selling for years. The image of moral righteousness began to blur, and in its place was something far more uncomfortable, a sense that maybe, just maybe, the outrage was never really about justice at all. Maybe it was just part of the performance. But this wasn't just a story about personalities. It was about how those personalities used the platform they had. While Sunny continued to stir emotions with her sharp takes and sweeping statements, Megyn Kelly kept peeling back the layers. She didn't chase applause. She wasn't trying to go viral with outrage. Instead, she pointed out the inconsistencies, the exact places where Sunny's statements didn't match up with the reality. For example, Sunny had long positioned herself as a fearless truth teller, especially when it came to calling out conservatives. But when confronted with her own contradictions, that moral energy seemed to fade. Megyn calmly highlighted how Sunny painted Trump supporters as ignorant while ignoring the complex reasons why many working-class Americans support him. It wasn't a single soundbite that did the damage, it was the buildup of small cracks that turned into one big collapse. And that's the real difference that was playing out. While one side relied on emotion, moral superiority, and group identity, the other brought receipts data, logic, and straightforward questioning. No yelling, no tantrums, just calm exposure of the gap between what's said and what's real, bit by bit. The carefully constructed image that Sunny had built over years on The View started to shake, not because someone shouted over her bit, because the truth didn't have to. It just had to stand next to the performance long enough for people to notice the difference. But what really pushed things over the edge was the fact that it almost didn't lead to an apology. Charlie explained that it took serious pressure just to get The View to say sorry, and even then, it wasn't clear if they really meant it. Behind the scenes, his team was already talking to high-profile lawyers, the kind of experts you bring in when you're not just angry, you're ready to fight. They were seriously weighing a lawsuit. And it wasn't about Charlie himself. He made that clear. It was about the 5,000 students who showed up at that event. Teenagers who were now being associated with neo-Nazi rhetoric just because they attended a conservative summit. That's the kind of label that sticks. That follows you into college applications, job interviews, and your online presence forever. Charlie saw it as more than just a smear. He saw it as character assassination broadcasts to millions by a network that didn't seem to care about the damage, and that's what made it so outrageous. It wasn't just political bias, it was real-life impact on kids who had done nothing wrong. The conversation shifted. It was no longer about who said what it was, about who was willing to take responsibility for what was said. And for once, it seemed like The View was facing actual consequences, not just angry tweets. They were up against people who knew how to play their game and win. And the deeper you looked, the uglier it got. Charlie and Megyn didn't stop at one clip or one comment, they zoomed out to show a pattern. Sunny hadn't just insulted uneducated voters once, she'd done it repeatedly. She had no problem calling out uneducated white women for voting the way they did, and then there was the jab at uneducated men too. The message was clear. If you didn't go to college and voted for Trump, you were on the wrong side of intelligence and morality. But here's where the backlash hit hard. People started asking, who gave her the right to define intelligence? Why was someone who had achieved so much in life so quick to trash others who hadn't taken the same path? Charlie didn't hold back. He pointed out how Sunny had benefited massively from the country she now criticizes on air. He called her out not just for what she said, but for how far removed she seemed from the people she judged. While she's enjoying the spotlight, luxury homes, Ivy League access for her kids, millions of Americans are working 2 jobs, raising families, and still being labeled as ignorant. The disconnect wasn't just political, it was personal. And it made people stop and think. When someone in power tells you who's worthy or educated, are they speaking from truther just from the top of their ivory tower? At this point, it wasn't even about politics anymore. It was about who gets to control the story. Charlie Kirk's strategy became crystal clear. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't name-calling. He was just laying out numbers. Hard data, cold facts. And those facts didn't care about anyone's feelings. That's what made them hit so hard. He showed voting breakdowns, timelines, and behavioral trends that told a much different story than the one Sunny had been selling on The View. She said Trump supporters were uneducated and dangerous. Charlie said, here's the data, now you decide. And then, almost silently, Sunny's narrative started collapsing. Because when you spend years positioning yourself as a defender of truth, but then ignore half the truth to push your own message, people notice. Charlie didn't need to call her a liar, he just pointed to the facts she left out. That was enough. And the damage was done. The image of Sunny as a fearless moral crusader didn't just take a hit, it began to unravel. Because every time she made a sweeping claim, someone else came back with receipts. Her outrage started looking less like passion and more like performance, and people could see it. She wasn't being taken down by insults. She was being undone by evidence. Then came the most personal twist of all. People started digging into Sunny's own family history, and what came out left a lot of jaws on the floor. On The View, Sunny once revealed that she was hesitant to explore her ancestry because she feared what she might find. And sure enough, when she did, it turned out her family history included slaveholders. Her mother's side, while Puerto Rican, originally came from Spain. Sunny explained that her ancestors moved slaves to Puerto Rico after the trade was canceled in Spain. For years, she believed her family were journalists and printers, but in reality, they had profited from slavery. This revelation clashed dramatically with the image she'd been promoting. While she regularly lectures America on its dark past and ongoing injustices, her own bloodline was tied to the very things she criticizes so harshly. And that's what hit hardest, not that she had slave-owning ancestors, but how she reacted to it. She didn't take a hard stand. She didn't reflect deeply. She moved on, carefully. For someone who speaks with such moral certainty, this silence was loud. And for her critics, it was just more proof that the outrage was selective. That Sunny is loud when calling out others, but quiet when the spotlight swings her way. It was the kind of twist that turned a heated debate into something way more personal and way harder to explain. As the firestorm grew, it stopped being just about Sunny or Charlene, became a full-blown clash of narratives. On one side, Sunny Hostin stood with years of TV presence, shaped by emotional appeals, outrage, and sharp takes aimed mostly at conservatives. Her style was familiar. Divide the world into good and bad, educated and ignorant, moral and immoral. And as long as her audience agreed, it worked. But on the other side stood two people who didn't play by that script. Kirk and Megyn Kelly weren't there to yell louder. They didn't try to match outrage with outrage. Instead, they did something far more dangerous. They ignored the theater and went straight for the truth. Quiet, steady, relentless. They showed that Sunny's outrage wasn't always rooted in facts or consistency. It was rooted in emotion and often in performance. They didn't try to cancel her. They didn't call for her to be silenced. They just held up a mirror. And what reflected back wasn't flattering. It was a moment where two completely different worlds collided, one driven by media drama, applause lines, and identity-based arguments. The other by calm facts, timelines, and data that couldn't be twisted. And the result was something we don't see often: a powerful media figure suddenly losing control of the story on her own turf. And then, like a final blow, came the one truth that no spin could cover. When you build your identity on outrage, you're always one fact away from collapse. Charlene and Megyn didn't need to dominate the airwaves with insults or viral tantrums. They simply showed up with the one thing that cuts through all noise: truth. While Sunny stirred emotions and played to her crowd, they calmly exposed how those emotions didn't always match reality. Her image as a fearless truth-teller started to look more like a role she'd been playing, a role that only worked if no one asked too many questions. And people started asking. Viewers, once swayed by fiery speeches and moral certainty, were suddenly paying attention to details. Where was the data? Why did certain groups get labeled so harshly? Why were only certain voices considered credible? These weren't partisan questions, they were human ones, honest ones. Because here's the part that really stuck with people. Truth didn't need to shout. It just needed to be seen. And once it was, Sunny's arguments didn't just feel dramatic, they felt hollow. The louder her outrage got, the more obvious it became that something wasn't adding up. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Also, drop your thoughts in the comments. See you on the next one.